up on my phone.
Perfect.
Gosh, I'm not even sure how all this ends. I think I just have to press a button here, but maybe it doesn't.
Yeah. No, I think
It seems to be.
But it has a little screen.
I know, it just keeps going and going and going. Let me just try this and then try this, and there we go. We're all here.
We're here.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very special Narrative Live. We're going to be doing something about the Greatest Heist, Chapter 9, which I just posted. It's called The Bomb, because I really think it is kind of a bomb. It's kind of stunning what we find out about Howard Lutnik and about Cantor Fitzgerald really being a Russian front. And I have tons and tons of evidence. I won't bore you with all of it tonight, but there's lots of proof of that. And I couldn't think of any two people better to be here today. But Ellie Leonard. Hi, Ellie. How are you?
Hello. Very well, thank
Lenny.
And Lev Parnas, who came up so often in my research on Cantor Fitzgerald. I was like, jeez, again, Lev, again in the middle of all the business that is Cantor Fitzgerald. And the 2008 was before 2008. But I want to get into a whole history there because it's really interesting how Lev, amongst many other, at the time, Russian aligned, I'll call mob figures, were involved in all sorts of business up and down the East Coast, but specifically with Cantor Fitzgerald. And Lev, it was one of your interviews with me that you mentioned Cantor Fitzgerald, and I was like, I let it, it just went past me when you said it. But then when I did the review of all of it, I remembered you said Cantor Fitzgerald. And for those of you who aren't affiliated, Cantor is a huge, huge brokerage firm that operates between brokers. So it's like a brokers firm. In other words, they don't really talk to the public as much as they talk to these big funds. And back in the 80s or 90s, when were you involved with them?
In the early 90s. It was like 92 to 95, around going further. No, I was actually involved with them further, going all the way up to, so from starting in maybe 95 actually till about 2002, early 2000,
Okay, so right before. Because the Greatest Heist.
Right after 9/11 we stopped. Right after 9/11.
Right after 9/11. That's interesting. Because 9/11 is a good also bookmark, if you will, for Howard Lutnik. Everyone remembers that Howard Lutnik was the guy who ran Cantor Fitzgerald and still does this before he became secretary. But on the day of 9/11, he escaped almost certain death because he was taking his son to his first day at kindergarten. And because of that, he missed the giant terror attack on the World Trade Center, where hundreds of his employees died, including his brother. And it became his claim to fame in many ways. It's sort of when he became a real public figure is when people heard his story. He was crying. He was upset. Obviously, his entire firm had been lost. And he had dodged a real bullet in this case in 9/11. And after that, he spent a lot of time dedicated to charities involving 9/11 and also supporting the families of the victims in his company who had died from 9/11. And it's 2008 where The Greatest Heist picks up. And The Greatest Heist in book 2 is all about the 2008 crash. So if you're thinking about it, if 9/11 was 2001, we're talking 7 years later, just to keep that in context for everyone. And here's the next seismic event where Howard Lutnik is a front row viewer of these events, because 9/11, he was there, he dodged a bullet there. And then comes the 2008 crash, and he dodges another bullet, because it turns out that all of Cantor's clients, including Cantor, shed $40 billion of these toxic assets before the crash of Lehman. And that is remarkable foresight. You might think, oh, that's incredible. It's incredible this man could see the market so well to dodge, to dump $40 billion worth of assets. Or maybe something else. It may be the fact, maybe it's related to the fact that Jeffrey Epstein was his neighbor, on 71st Street there. The two were neighbors. Both houses were sold to each of them by Leslie Wexner. Jeffrey Epstein got his for $1 and Lutnik got his for 10. Of course, there's other money that floated around with that exchange too. but that's unusual. I mean, you have to, the odds of that happening are incredibly limited. So, Lev, take us back to that period in the 2000s there where you were involved as a broker yourself in selling some of Cantor's assets.
Well, yeah, actually, I had an even different relationship with Cantor, and you gotta understand. You said something very important for people to understand. Cantor Fitzgerald was a broker's broker, a market makers. They dealt in making markets in bonds and also making markets in some of the big board stocks out there. And where my relationship first started with Cantor Fitzgerald is when I bought my broker dealer, and we specialized in making markets in bulletin board pink sheet stocks. Now, just to give everybody a little understanding, bulletin board pink sheet stocks are very speculative. It was like junk bonds back in for those that remember the, Milken era and stuff like that. Same thing. This was like in the brokerage firm. So it was a very unregulated industry, just like now you see what's happening with cryptocurrency, very similar to what that time era was. And so our relationship started by with a lot of clientele from Cantor Fitzgerald were trading in these bulletin board pink sheet stocks. So we started doing business with them and making markets for them. And the one thing I could tell you is, and this is where I think your investigative work is really good, and you'll get more into it, is by being a market maker, you have information on both sides, and you have
Mhm.
a fiduciary responsibility, because it's like on different exchanges. By making a market, is you have the buys and the sells. On the New York Stock Exchange, you actually literally have the ticket standing on the floor. On the Nasdaq, it's a computer where you're posting a bid and an offer. So on different exchanges, so you have information. By being market maker in all of these solutions, he has actually had information, understanding what was happening in major big events. His relationship to people like Epstein, and that's why I always say it's like the corruption. It doesn't matter. It's the same thing. It doesn't matter if it's a pink sheet stock or if it's a big, big, New York Stock Exchange stock. It's the same system. It's the same level. It's just different people that have just more powerful information or have different access. But the scheme is the same. The information is the same. The way it's done is the same. But it's
It's
just
really
process. So
important
yeah,
what you're saying there. It's these little schemes are basically the same mechanisms that can
same
bring down an
schemes.
entire market. They all operate in the same way. They just expand in size, expand in numbers. And a lot of the time, it's the same players doing repeat schemes because it's such a great way to make money. I mean, if it works, it's a great way to make money.
Do you hear me good now? Because some people were saying in the chat that they can't hear
Yeah, I
me.
can hear you.
Do you hear me good? You can hear me good?
Yeah,
Okay.
you're good.
All
Yeah,
right.
you sound
All right.
fine to me.
Okay.
It wasn't, just to be clear with everyone, the companies that you worked with, especially the one involved in the Cantor Fitzgerald stuff. I mean, got into a bit of trouble, I think, after you left, but it got into some trouble. And wasn't it delisted or something like that? And just so everyone is clear about your participation in that, is there anything you want to say about that time?
Yeah, well, the company's name was Program Trading. I think you're talking about, is that the company? Yeah, so
Yeah, that is
Program
right. Yeah.
Trading. Yeah, Program Trading was a brokerage firm that I purchased with a group of investors out of Orlando, Florida. I moved it down to Boca Raton, Florida in 95, 96, around like that. And that was the business where we were market makers. Because of when I closed down, without getting too detailed, it was a very unregulated industry, and a lot of the traders themselves were able to have their own clients. It's without getting too detailed, too complicated. So it was a business very difficult to oversee all of your traders. I had over 200 of them at the time, and each one of them was making a market for a very you'd say volatile stock, or a lot of them were run by the mob, run even by, and it's interesting to say, because, Coca-Cola was once a pink sheet stock. So pink sheet stocks were corrupted by some of the bigger investors also. It's just because it was an unregulated industry. You think
But
they're
pause
very,
there on the mob, because that is important that people understand that this was fertile territory for the mafia. I mean, this is a place they
yes.
can make money, relatively easy money. Downside was not so big. If they got caught, they get slaps on the wrist. They didn't really necessarily have to pay a big price.
It
So
was
describe
incredible.
that
Yeah.
environment back then.
Yeah, back then it was literally because it was so unregulated. people you were I mean, you had stories like the mob on Wall Street. It was back then where the Italian mob, the Russian mob, the Chinese. I mean, a lot of these organized crimes dealt into this industry, which is called Wall Street, and realized that because of these unregulated parts, you were able. I mean, you had a high risk, low risk, high reward. The penalties were very small at the time. People were getting a year and a half, 2 years prison term in federal prison, while they were taking 50 million, hundreds of millions of dollars in fine for what you would see a guy like Bernie Madoff getting now 25 year. Back then he'd probably get 10 years, or it would. It was a totally different world, and it was something until it got regulated. The mob was heavily infiltrated, and people like also Ace Greenberg from Bear Stearns. I mean, he was heavily also involved in penny pink sheets, penny, a lot of these stocks. Again, like I said, it was on different levels. So what the mob did, it was the same identical thing. It was structuring companies that had, let's say, very scrupulous assets, or didn't do exactly what they were supposed to, but they would be able to get them under the radar, and then use pump and dump, meaning high pressure boiler room operations to sell these stocks. The reason they were able to do it back then is because back then you didn't have technology. So if you got to remember, back in the 90s, this is when just you couldn't get a stock quote like you could get now everywhere. You didn't have day traders. You didn't have people that the only way you could get a stock quote is if you had a broker. And it felt prestigious to have a stockbroker to call in and get, it was a different world. And the pink sheets, they would get listed only once a month. So the only way you could get a quote on that stock that you owned is you had to have an account, a broker. And this is why these high profile, you had these boiler rooms. And one of the individuals I worked with at the time that became very famous, and you saw the movie, it was The Wolf of Wall Street, Jordan Belfort. And, it was that type of environment on all different levels. So it didn't matter if you were Epstein, the structure of the companies, or if you were, a small time hoodlum. It was the same structure. You structured them the same. You filed them the same. Sometimes you even use the same lawyers. You had the same high priced lawyers, and to make it, package it, and look good.
But the Russian money was everywhere, right? I mean, the Russian mob particularly loves this area because it's why not? It's easy. Yeah. Well, so Mogilevich is one of them. Mogilevich, of course, everybody knows, connected to Robert Maxwell. Robert Maxwell, of course, Ghislaine Maxwell's father, Jeffrey Epstein's mentor, if you want. It's interesting that Mogilevich connects directly or indirectly there, if you want, to Epstein. And this is the guy who likes all these things. And Epstein himself knew how to play the market. There is no doubt in anyone's mind that one of his big skills was playing financial markets and collapsing companies.
And I just want to touch on that, which is extremely important, what you're saying right now, Zev, to what's happening today. Literally today, actually, what we saw today with what Donald Trump is doing with the market. Donald Trump is also very astute with how the market works, just like Epstein, maybe not but Donald Trump is very well aware of how to manipulate market, what you're seeing play out today with him coming out and making these announcements about Iran, and all of a sudden you saw the spike in the oil market and the financial markets, and all of a sudden Iran coming down. Somebody's making trillions of dollars. There's trillions of dollars being made and lost in a matter of hours, folks. And insider information is like literally no more. I mean, you see that the Lutniks of the world, the family members, these are the people. So going back to that era is like, just think about what, so they know absolutely how to manipulate the markets. They know how to, do it absolutely on different levels. I'm sorry, go ahead, sir.
No, the only thing I wanted to add to that is the Russian money that came in also came into Cantor Fitzgerald. In the research that I published tonight in The Greatest Heist, we discover a lot of information directly linking Cantor to the Russian mob. It's not even like it's maybe a Russian front. It seems to be all a Russian front. I mean, there are companies like Renaissance. There are companies like
Renaissance,
Interjura, which is another one, which you might remember was connected to Manafort, connected to Deripaska. That, according to the 302s released in the Epstein files, some people, insiders from the Cantor Fitzgerald, told the FBI that these companies, these Russian offshore holdings and other banks, were directly linked to Cantor Fitzgerald. And there are 8 very big nodes, which you can track now through the Panama Papers and all of those, directly linking Cantor to these Russian efforts to launder money out of Russia and other places around the world. So, we've heard Howard Lutnik be described as many things, but we haven't really heard him being described as a Russian asset, as someone who's running a front for the Russians, for Putin. But it increasingly looks to me like that's what he is. And that should really, really raise questions about his involvement with Epstein. Because Epstein, after all, triggered the 2008 crash, and then Lutnik triggered the sell-off.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is exactly, the work you're doing and the connection and the links that you're connecting, and this is extremely important because when you talk about Lutnik, all of a sudden a connection to the Russian mob. Just think about what we were uncovering a few months ago. We were breaking the same news about Steve Witkoff and his connections to the Russian mob going back to the same time, same era. I mean, this is the club of people. This is Donald Trump, everybody in his administration, all of them are connected to the Russian mob, to the Russian oligarchy, because they are all in that good old boys club that during the 90s and the 2000s, during the fall of the Soviet Union and when the oligarchy came in, these were the people that were in the Epstein club that was in that time of young girls, models and everything. And the Russians knew how to use it during the fall of the Soviet Union. That's why even Putin came out one day and said, we have the best prostitutes in Russia. I mean, as disgusting as it sounds, but that was part of, a trigger, a tool that they used that connected them to Epstein, that connected them into that world because they were powerful people. And like I always say, you got to understand, when you're in that club, all of a sudden, just think about it. Here you are, you're this powerful guy, you're very famous, you have this wife, you have kids, but inside you have these perversions, and all of a sudden you meet this guy Epstein and you become friends, and he's also as powerful, and you build this trust, and he's like, hey, you want a massage? Oh my God, I feel great. Oh, all of a sudden now you're in that club, now you're in that bond. Now you know what I'm saying to you, and
You
on
all have
the
a secret.
outside, you all have a secret that ties you, and that's what the Epstein files were. But what the Epstein files, it's that that dark, nasty secret that tied them together. But what it exposes is what you're talking about, is the big financial crimes that they were all involved with, because all of these people are billionaires now. All of these people, have been involved for the past 20, 30 years of a lot of things that had to do with our financial institutions. So yes, the crime, the disgusting stuff that's connected them all, and the unraveling is the nastiness of the pedophilia. But the actual major crimes that they were all connected for 30 years was all the business dealings and all the money they stole and all the financial crimes that have gone on, which
They took $80
connected to
trillion
Russia.
out of the economy, $80 trillion out of taxpayers' wallets, really. And we'll explain exactly how they did that in a bit. But Ellie, a lot of this came out of the Epstein files. We've been looking at them together for way too long now. I mean, we spend many hours chatting all the time about these things. But there's a couple that show up around Lutnik, and it's an indicator. I mean, he doesn't say that Lutnik and Epstein were for sure involved together. But when you get 2 whistleblowers 4 months apart calling the FBI and saying, Epstein and Lutnik appear to have worked together, we got information, we got documents, and then the FBI launches its own separate investigation into Lutnik and also investigates him as part of Epstein, it's kind of begins to look like there's something really there between these two, and more than just a visit to the island.
Right. There's just basics. There's just the basics. If you just want to look at the baseline information, they shared a wall for 20 years, right? When they got their coffee in the morning, when they took the kids to or when the Lutniks took the kids to school, anytime you see pictures of Prince Andrew waving out the front door of Epstein's house, like Lutnik lived next door. He lived next door until the day, I think he still owns the house. He bought the house in 98. He still owns the house. So like, what is that? 19 years, 20 years? And so you can say that they're uninvolved, but I think it's probably pretty rare to not know the neighbor who lives next door to you for 20 years. If you're both involved in finance and brokerage and major firms that are multi-million, multi-billion, multi-trillion, you have something to talk about, right? That is, you know, something to talk about over dinner. But then just the idea, again, with the island, and with any of these people, but I think Lutnik in particular, of if you have nothing to hide, then you don't hide anything. And so when he keeps coming forward and saying, this is a disgusting man, I went to his house one time, I saw a massage table and got the hell out of there. Like, you wouldn't say that if there was nothing to cover up, right? If there was nothing to cover up, you'd say, you know, I was invited to the island. My wife and my kids went there for lunch. Like, we totally were there. It was weird, but this is how many, you know what I mean? Like, it becomes suspicious when you catch people in a lie, and they have so many things that they can relate on, mostly involving money, JP Morgan, you know,
The guy they bought the house
like all
from.
these,
Bear Stearns.
Leslie Wexner,
Yeah.
Lee
right?
Wexner.
Like,
Major funder.
Bear
And
Stearns,
so,
yeah.
right. And so it becomes implausible that they are not working together in any way, that they're completely living separate paths 24 hours a day and have nothing to do with each other. I find that completely implausible.
Also, to Ellie's point, you gotta understand. Now you have all these billionaires, millionaires. It's the numbers are crazy. If you take a look at 1990s, that
Mhm.
club of people that wealthy as like the Wexners or the Lutniks or the Ace Greenbergs, it was a very small club
Yeah.
compared to what it is today. So it's like you knew who was in. I mean, it was a who's who, but you knew it was a very small club, and these are people like just like you see you have these different cliques like in Hollywood or in, a music industry where that use their power to for perversion or for doing kind of crazy stuff. This was the financial world. This was Wall Street. This is it. This is what held all our markets. And this is where their perversion came in, that uncovered it. And Epstein was the straw, I mean, was the thing that held them all together. But all of them were connected to the Russians. All of them were connected to this, knew about
Right.
this perversion, this way of lifestyle, like you said, Ali, because it was impossible not to be. Just going back to thinking of, around how these people, it was such tight, you couldn't get into these clubs. It was like the Epstein clique, like they were so tight and they were so like there was no way of getting in. You looked from the outside, as I remember wanting to be part of it, hoping to be, thinking, oh, I'll be blessed if Ace or Epstein or takes me in or works in,
Mhm.
because you looked at them on the outside, they were this pristine model of whatsoever, but on the inside it was a deep, dark
Mhm.
Yeah.
not only corruption, but like we're seeing the pedophilia and the sickness of all of this.
Mhm.
Sorry about that, guys,
You're,
but
s-
just
No worries.
I was
reminding
I
gonna
was
you
say
going
of
to
the
put
really,
this up.
sickness of all these people.
I
That
was
was
gonna say
beautiful
really
and
quick.
accurate. Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Ellie.
Oh no, I just wanted to say really quick, especially with that article that came out for the New York Times today. Like, there are a lot of, countries that are involved in Epstein's dealings, but Russia
Is that
continually is number one.
Yeah, go ahead. Can you hear me, Lev? Ah, we might have lost Lev. I know why we lost you, Lev. We got the same issue here as we have some. So you're gonna have to you're gonna join us again. Sorry, Lev. I know what's going on. Every time we throw up a thing, you have to call us again.
Oh no.
It's going to be a bit of a challenge as we play these out. So I'll leave them to the
Yeah.
end. Reconnect. Go ahead, Ellie. Just explain what you were about to say. I think it's very crucial.
Okay. So when you look at these stories of people like Leon Black, and you look at the stories of people like Bill Gates, and you look at these bank accounts, the 134 bank accounts that are listed in JP Morgan that are connected with Jeffrey Epstein, the number one country that is on and involved in all these situations is Russian. It's Russian women, and it's Russian money, and it's Russian money going through Russian women. And there's a reason for that. Like, even if, let's say in the case of Leon Black, this is not an underage girl, right? This is a 30-year-old woman. he's paying her millions of dollars, and
Yeah.
they're trying to find ways for that to not show up on their taxes, and he's sending it back to Russia. There's just this continual stream of money going back and forth through the friends of Epstein to Russia.
This is what you're referring to, is the David Enrich reporting today in the New York Times, which says something we all sort of knew before, that Leon Black spent millions of dollars to pay Epstein for what were accounting services. And what the New York Times reveals today is that those accounting services involved paying off women who Leon Black was involved in. So it's a significant investigation that they're doing. And again, what you're saying there, Ellie, Russia, Russia, Russia. It's always involving Russian money, Russian women. It's always the same thing. Lev, the reason you got cut off, and I realize this with Dean sometimes, is when we play elements, because you've got your own StreamYard account, for some reason, it doesn't let you do that. So I'll explain it to you later,
wow.
but I won't play any more clips or any taking full screens while you're with us. I don't know if you had a comment about what we were just talking about, Leon Black, and about the Russian women and about all of that, and the David Enrich pipeline that we were talking about.
Well, I didn't get a chance to hear about everything you're saying, but I could, when you say Russia and women, obviously I know that era very well, and that was that was a very strong era where they had the two components that brought them together: young women and money. It was an extreme amount of flow of money. Just think about what Russian money did with Donald Trump, and then we'll compare it with Epstein everywhere. When the market, I remember they would sell apartments. Trump would be selling apartments. He would be happy if one person came in and spent days to buy one apartment. Russian oligarchs would come in there, take a look at one apartment, and say, "Okay, we want to buy 20 of them on different floors."
Like Bogotan. That's what Bogotan did. Did you know Bogotan? David Bogotan, was that his name?
Yeah,
Was that
of
his
course.
first name?
I think that's David Bogotan.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but he was just one of many. Yeah.
But did you know him? Did you know him personally?
I've met several times, but
Shows on your phone.
I'll go look. If you want,
You
I'll
can
go
ask
look.
the
I'll go
questions. You
look. I'll
don't
go
have to
look.
answer them, but I will ask the
I'll go
questions.
look. No, go ahead. I mean, I just don't remember. The name sounds familiar. I mean, I just don't want to go
He's
off track. But I have to
Mogilevich's
look.
lieutenant in Brooklyn, right? So you might have crossed paths.
If he was in Brooklyn, I probably would have.
Yeah.
David Bogut. What was he like? Give me some other Brooklyn. What did he
Craig
have?
Unger says he was the first person connected to Mogilevich to buy the condos from Donald Trump as a Russian mafia entity. So this would be in the 80s.
But what in the 80s and 90s like that?
Yeah, around then, yeah.
I think it was he had a different last name. He cut it to Bogotan maybe to make it sound
Maybe. I screw up these names all the time.
Now that you got me interested, I'll look afterwards.
I'll start searching, and then I'll give you more information while you guys.
Ellie's great. Ellie will find it before we get into it. But listen, just to give the example, like they were buying 20 apartments. Same thing when they came into the stock market, when they realized pink sheet companies, they understood. So Americans were coming in. I'll give you an example. Like if you took a look at like the movie The Wolf of Wall Street, and you had these guys going out there finding a company that was very not, let's say, worthless, and they would make it look like it was worth so much on paper, and then they would get these brokers, they would go sell the stock, they would manipulate it, and the stock would go up, and then once everybody sold their private stock, then all of a sudden the stock would start coming down. That was a typical pump and dump. See, the Russians realized how it works, and from the Italians, and they took it a step further because they had a lot of money that they would invest themselves. So, like, they started really making where Mogilevich and them really started making money. They started taking companies, oil and mineral companies, which you couldn't really audit all the stuff, the examples of where they were really banking in on companies from actually Russian companies that they took public, Canadian companies. I think Mogilevich was the last company that they were involved with. There was a Canadian, also an American.
Felix Sater was involved in that too.
Felix Sater, right? That's what I'm saying to you. That was all that that same world. That's why when we talk about, that's why when Ellie said she's 100% right, and we keep saying to like you, it's the same names, it's the same people. It's like it's impossible that Lutnik did not know Epstein. It's impossible that Trump did not hang out with Epstein or Lutnik or at that time. I mean, it's impossible that they didn't do business with Ace Greenberg or Morgan.
Yeah.
They all did. They all had accounts. You know what I'm saying to you? It's impossible they did.
Small
You know,
world.
because
It's a very small world.
well, it's the
New
same
York
broker.
is
I mean, yeah,
small.
and it's just think about how small it is now. Back then, it was even smaller. I can't even explain to you. If you
Mhm.
guys think about the 1980s and 90s, a guy like Donald Trump, a guy like Epstein would be impossible to come next to. It would be easier to get to the president to a guy like
These
Epstein or
days,
Trump.
absolutely. But
You
back
know what I'm
then,
saying to
Yeah.
you?
you
Yeah, I'm
could run
saying to
his
you.
doorbell.
It was like that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying to you. It's great. It was a very tight little community that's still tight, and
When we
that's
were about
why.
to show everyone those 302s earlier on, which is
Go
the
yeah.
whistleblowers, I can't show you them documents because it will lose Lev, but I'll give you a sense of what they say. Because this is someone who worked at Cantor Fitzgerald. This is someone who called up the FBI and said, I used to work there for a period of time. This is what I saw at a very senior level. This is information I have. And one of the key things he says is that Lutnik and Epstein were involved in business together. It talks about the property connection, which we've already mentioned around Wexner, the $10 purchase of the Wexner house, that Epstein was involved in that sale. Then it also talks about charity fraud, and it talks about how Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and Sarah Ferguson held these Dolce Vita parties, which involved charity fundraising, and that charity fundraising was all fraudulent, and that Epstein was involved in that too. So,
Yes.
in fact, the Ferguson offices were right above Cantor Fitzgerald. They got offices from Lutnik, and that's apparently turned out to be a fraudulent scheme, like many of Lutnik's charity events were fraudulent schemes. Ellie, do you know much about that?
Well, I would say that is probably a trend in those topmost financial folks. Like you can look at all these, massive lineup of like LLCs and the Florida Science Foundation and Terramar and all these companies that they started that were supposed to be philanthropic. It's what Michael Wolff was trying to build Epstein back up as this huge philanthropist and change his Wikipedia page so they didn't say anything about the sex crimes. None of them actually made any money. And none of them gave any money back to like the science foundations. Like if you look at Epstein's whole time in the Palm Beach lockup, when he was allowed to leave 12 hours a day, he was working for the Florida Science Foundation. It wasn't giving money anywhere. It was not actually doing anything. And so this was a cover that they constantly did that then ended up in these sort of like forensic reports from the U.S. Virgin Islands that talk about J.P. Morgan and what was actually going on with all these LLCs and all these bank accounts. So I think it is very likely that a lot of people, you think of Leon Black, you think of Howard Lutnik, a lot of these folks had really, really great accountants like Richard Kahn, to name drop a few, right? Who knew how to hide money. The Southern Trust is a great example. Like that was a financial trust. Who knows what it was for? Who knows where it went? It continued on after Epstein was dead. But they all had these sort of front accounts or companies that were set up to be philanthropic, but the money went nowhere.
It's fascinating though that this is a whistleblower saying Ghislaine Maxwell, Sarah Ferguson, Jeffrey Epstein involved in a criminal fraudulent scheme. I mean, that is still a crime. Last time I checked, stealing from children in crisis is, of course, the worst kind of crime you can imagine. But it seems to be what these guys were involved in. It's a big deal. And again, no investigation followed on that. Nothing, because it involved Ghislaine, because it involved Jeffrey Epstein. Who knows why it didn't connect.
Well, that's a big thing, though. It didn't just stop there, because I remember in the 90s, one of the things that, these accounts, before you had Epstein, there was another guy named Mark Rich that was connected to, and Mark Rich was also involved in a lot of that stuff with the Russians. Iran was selling weapons and also funneling money. He was a very, Clinton guy people forgot about that guy, but he was also very. And there was others that basically what the American accountants basically taught organized crime, not only here locally like themselves, but the Russian organized crime is how to use all of these philanthropic entities to make themselves, give themselves cover, give themselves also creativity without action, and using them as ways to clean money. For themselves, also ways of funneling money, cleaning money, and getting themselves out of it. And you'll take a look of that with a lot of these Russian oligarchy. You'll see that that's the first thing that they would do is wherever in England, where it doesn't matter if it's London, if it's the U.S., wherever it is, the first thing they do is they donate to charities, and then they start up their own philanthropic organization, and they build up their character through that and use that as a machine to funnel money and to clean their name.
The two key Russian fronts of Russian entities that we've been able to identify of eight. There's eight very important ones. We'll go through them all at a separate live that we do. But the two key ones are the ones we mentioned earlier. One of them is Renaissance Capital. Can you tell us what you know about Renaissance and why it's significant to Russia?
Well, Renaissance was one of the
Renaissance,
original.
sorry.
Yeah, well, it was one of the, and it's okay. It was one of the original oligarchy conglomerates where a lot, came from. I think it was tied to Mogilevich also back in the day. I'm sure you would know better than me.
Appears to have, yeah.
That has all the credit, but it was not only, and Renaissance from there, it was like the key player in the beginning in the 90s of, of what we saw, the investments, also all the, stripping of all the natural resources in Russia. I'm saying to you, Renaissance was the beginning, and but they went through a lot. You had murder there, a lot of killings of the owners, and then switch.
Yeah, and that office is everywhere. It was connected to Mikhail Prokhorov, former presidential candidate apparently in Russia, and they were also involved in the buyout of Citibank. But their main thing was Cyprus. Cyprus turns out to be a big hub. And why is Cyprus so important to the story?
Offshore banking, secrecy. Even if you take a look in the Hunter Biden stuff, when we went after Hunter Biden, one of the places that they would be paying even them was through Cyprus, because Cyprus has secrecy laws that wouldn't release the money. So that's why all of these funding and money, Cyprus, and also there was another Isle of Man, this Isle of Man off it was another island that we used had a lot of good secrecy. These were the new ways of, Switzerland back in the 40s, 50s. Switzerland was what everybody saw in movies, where people would hold their money and go there and get. But then Switzerland, obviously the laws changed, or international, especially after 9/11. After 9/11, Cyprus and Isle of Man, another country like that, became extremely important, and all the money, hiding of the assets. And
so it's in Cyprus that we find the other company as well. And we've only got you for a few more minutes here, so I'm just going to ask you this one question here, if we can. It's called Interjura is the company. Now, those people who've been following attention since Trump Russia would remember that Interjura also had significant clients: Paul Manafort, Rick Gates, Oleg Deripaska, among its many other clients, and all the money that was used to funnel money out of Ukraine during the time when Manafort and Gates basically owned Yanukovych, who was then the leader of Ukraine. They stole lots of money from the treasury in Ukraine, and they used Interjura to do that.
Oh yeah.
Now,
go ahead.
Then they went from there to the Trump campaign, and Manafort became the campaign manager for Trump, and we know the story from there. So this is a big connection that this is making, because we now know that Cantor Fitzgerald was using Interjura as a significant money laundering effort, or move money around in general. That is remarkable, because it ties it directly to the same offshore holding that connects to Donald Trump and Manafort and 2016.
I'll just give you a little story time, just funny, quick 1 minute. So my ex-partner, Igor, who was with me, that got arrested, when Manafort first came to Ukraine, he came, I remember Igor telling me he came as this guy that looked like a real lobbyist with a, $200 suit. After spending a few weeks with Igor, he was wearing $30,000 ostrich jackets and getting 5,000 Brioni suits. They did a makeover, and basically that was a time where even though he was working in Ukraine and working for the Ukrainian president and for his elections, he was really working for Vladimir Putin and working because Yanukovych was a Russian asset at the time they were trying to they had their own president that trying to get Ukraine back, not through war but through a signature, and that's where we had Maidan, the revolution at the time in 2014. But so I mean, Manafort was working directly for the Russians in Ukraine at the time, funneling money through Interjura, which had accounts, obviously with you're amazing that you connect the dots with the money flow with Howard
Cantor.
Lutnik
Yeah.
and Cantor Fitzgerald. And again, I said it doesn't amaze me because it's the same group of people. It's the same. If you go back for the past, since the 80s, 90s, and these are the people, and these are the same names. And remember, where is Howard? Just remember another connection that you got with Manafort, who used to be his partner before, this whole thing that happened to be also that Trump pardoned. It was what's his name?
Kilimnik or no Kilimnik.
No, the crazy dude from Florida, the
Smirnov.
nutcase. No, the nutcase that has a
nutcase.
tattoo. That has a tattoo of what's his name on his back.
Roger Stone.
Roger Stone, yeah.
Yes.
So Stone
Nixon tattoo.
Yeah, Nixon tattoo. Yeah, so
it's like Trump Russia parade.
Right. Yeah. So Stone used to be partners with Manafort in their lobbying area. So what I'm saying to you is all of this comes together. This is all a group of people that have been together for a very long time, that have a lot of secrets, a small society that, yes, and all the roads lead to Russia, 100%. Because
and one of the ways it leads there, and I will leave you with this one, Levin, Ellie, hopefully you can stay on a little bit longer. The Deripaska, Oleg Deripaska, is one of the key oligarchs in the Trump Russia story. If you can, cast your mind back to then, it was Deripaska who had his finger in every element in the Trump Russia story. And it's interesting that, as Mueller died this week, I went back and looked at all my notes from Trump Russia, and it's incredible how Deripaska was central to all of that. Deripaska was also part of Interjura. So now going back to 2008, which is when we're talking about this crash happening, and Lutnik being involved in taking $40 billion out of the market just before Lehman crashed. In other words, facilitating the crash that Jeffrey Epstein initially set or triggered when he was working with the Bear Stearns funds. You've got a cascade here and connections to people that tie directly to Trump. The crash in 2008, connecting Lutnik, Epstein, Trump, and Deripaska. That's a hell of a string to pull, or thread to pull, and I hope people do, because it sure looks like Lutnik is involved in a lot of trouble.
I mean, listen, just think about. I always say this stuff. Think about the things we're talking about. Now, just think about what we don't know. Think about the things that we're just not out. Not even forget about the Epstein files. Just the things that are just. I mean, this was an era that this was a group of people that were controlled a lot of assets of the way we lived through, financial world. They controlled New York, Wall Street at that time, the bond market, the, stock market, all of these markets, now we're seeing it in open sight with what's happening and with oil, with crude, with all of this. But if you go back in history and take a look, besides 2008, if you really start looking, you're going to see lots of little, where it wasn't huge crashes, but they still made billions or hundreds of millions of dollars that they split up, and where you had regular investors lost money. It was an old school, that never changed. That's why I say it didn't matter if you were Morgan Stanley, Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, or a schlock house like Barrett Day Securities. It was the same system.
Same scheme.
It was the same scheme. It was just that you could take 100 million because you had Merrill Lynch on there, and I would only take 10 million because I was some schlock house. I didn't have the credibility you did, but it was the same scheme, same paperwork, and same time.
Only the scale is different.
Yeah, the different scale. So yeah, doesn't surprise me any of these people. It was the same group going back to the 90s.
Lev Parnas from Lev remembers. Everyone who has not yet subscribed to him absolutely does for these incredible trips down memory lane, because Lev, you've lived a life that is full of so many chapters, and you are one of the few people who's willing to talk about what happened inside all this time, and certainly great to get your insights into Cantor Fitzgerald. What do you want to share with everyone about how they can support you and where they can find you?
Oh, I appreciate that, Zev. First of all, just tomorrow we're going to do a special. Maybe you could also join us, Zev. Me and Ellie are going to do. We're going to figure out the time. Michael Wolf, folks, is next on the list. He's been sliding here and there, but it's time for the Wolf Pack to sink our teeth into Michael Wolf. So
Ironically.
ironically, not physically. We're not
You've got mission.
But tomorrow we're gonna. So stay tuned. Set your alarm. We're definitely going to go into it. Ellie's been doing some incredible work uncovering his connection and how this all ties together, and going into also the GoFundMe that he has out there and all of the stuff. So we're going to go into that tomorrow. But also today, if you guys want, when we're done here at 7 o'clock, I'm going to start my first show that I'm going to be running weekly, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Live. Lev remembers that Inside Report. It's just trying to get a little organized, guys. Trying to get there and get
But 7 p.m. is my slot. No, it's okay.
Well, 7 p.m. is Wednesday. Only Wednesdays your slot. But you like 6.
It's okay. I'm flexible.
We'll be flexible.
Maybe I'll start one at 7 p.m.
I love you.
Sure.
I'll have you on at 7.
Yeah, no problem. I'm there.
Well, no, absolutely. But yeah, guys. Anyway, definitely you can join me at Love Remembers on YouTube or Substack, and definitely my campaign, loveparnas.org. That's for all of us. I'm running for the 27th District, Florida, for Congress. A lot more that's coming up in there, but definitely also give a follow to our incredible investigative journalists, Zev, Ellie, Kate Justice, and others out there that are doing some incredible work. And for all you Wolfpack out there, love you guys. Keep it up. Keep the support. Thanks, Zev, for having me. I'll see you tomorrow, Ellie.
Great to have you on, Lev. Have a great night.
Guys.
Bye, Lev. Oh,
hey,
we're a happy family. We really are.
I know. I was looking at all the thumbnails and I was like, I'm just so cheerful in all these videos. Maybe this is where I'm supposed to be.
You are very cheerful in these videos because you're I love your energy. I just do, by the way, in everything. It's just it's very authentic and very earnest in many ways, and then also just very, just real. Let's talk a little bit more about, these 302s, because now we can pull them up with a lot more ease. And then I'm going to also play you a clip from Epstein and Bannon, which is something you originally pointed me to. So this 302, I mean, people underestimate how important these 302s are. These are people who, in the moment, decided to call the FBI and reveal some dark secrets, whether it's the sexual abuse that they suffered or, in this case, the crimes that Cantor Fitzgerald and Howard Lutnik participated in. And one of the key things that, this involves a whole bunch of things. We talked about the charities, we talked about the house, we talked about all those other things. But if I'm not mistaken, at the end of this one, there's a comment, which I always struggle to read these when it's on the screen here. Maybe I can find it in this other one. But the basic thing is that the FBI ran a search on Howard Lutnik, and they discovered something like 34 different hits where his name came up in various investigations. You may not be able to see it here because it may in fact be on a different page. But the idea that the FBI knew that 34 instances of alleged money laundering happened, and that this guy became the Commerce Secretary regardless, is stunning. There is a vetting process which they completely washed through. Somehow, Lutnik became the Commerce Secretary, even though he's involved in so many, many crimes, or allegedly involved in so many crimes. And yet he's still there today.
Yeah, that's that idea of, people go, oh, he's slipping, he's on thin ice, and it's like he only is if he's being investigated, right? There's a lot of these guys who should be on thin ice, but they give their subpoena, their testimony, they lie, they give a proffer to Todd Blanche, they lie, and they're benefited from that. Nobody's actually, I don't feel like anybody has seriously been investigated as much as people want to. I think there are good people in Congress who are trying to investigate, but they're in such a minority right now that you have Pam Bondi is blocking everything. And And so it's only like a slippery slope for Howard Lutnick if people are actually doing their jobs, which I don't think they really
I don't think they are. And I think that's the point, is you've got these Russian mob figures, and I will, go out on a limb here and say that Lutnik is a Russian mob figure, that Cantor Fitzgerald is a Russian mob front. And Lutnik is the Commerce Secretary. The president is considered a Russian asset. To say, Witkoff, of course, is a Russian asset. Jared Kushner considered a Russian asset. To say that the White House is captured right now by the Russian mafia is not an understatement. It is accurate. And that should send chills up and down everyone's spine, because just think about what that means. It's not just a criminal organization, an organized criminal organization that has seized the White House, but it's one of the most vicious criminal organizations in the world. And it's our adversaries, it's our enemies organization.
Right. The fact that there's been no accountability for Putin, you can sit back as an American government and watch Alexei Navalny just like happen to die in jail, after he was poisoned, after he was imprisoned, and then just sit back and watch that happen and just do nothing about it. You know what I mean? And you look at, like, there's literally a Wikipedia page for Russian journalists who have been killed on the job, shot on their porch, found in a ditch, buried alive. Like they are a horrible, horrible, corrupt, and very vicious institution. And the fact that the United States continues to try to work with them, I think, says more than anything, because I don't feel like in the past maybe we would have, I don't know, but like it just feels like something that we would have been like,
Robert Mueller's mission from, who passed away this weekend. Robert Mueller's mission from Barack Obama was to end transnational criminal organizations, and specifically the kind that we're talking about here. It's one of the reasons Trump may have become president, was because of a reaction to that, and why Robert Mueller had so much to do in terms of setting the stage for his own, term there as the special counsel. A couple of quick things. I got to get this in. So Steve Bannon sits down with Jeffrey Epstein in what is an apparent attempt to rehabilitate Jeffrey Epstein's image. 2 hours of this video show up with inside the Epstein files. You pointed me to this when it happened, I think. And here are a couple of quotes from there, a couple of clips from there, which are kind of stunning. One of them, I think, this one is about the day Lehman Brothers crashed. So you've got this period of time. Let me just try to set it up for you. Let's imagine all these dominoes. You've got Bear Stearns crashing. That's something that Jeffrey Epstein triggered. He sold off a huge number of, mortgage-backed securities, and basically he crashed Bear Stearns. Bear Stearns gets bought up by JP Morgan. Liquid funding, which is run by Jeffrey Epstein, gets bailed out by the U.S. taxpayer, by the Treasury. A huge amount of money, $6.7 billion from your money, goes directly to pay off Jeffrey Epstein and his friend's secret fund. After that, Cantor Fitzgerald and Howard Lutnik start selling off $40 billion in toxic assets over 60 days. That's a lot of toxic assets that actually triggers the next collapse. And the next collapse is Lehman Brothers. And Lehman Brothers collapses in September. At the time, as luck would have it, Jeffrey Epstein was in solitary confinement. And he describes to Steve Bannon what happened.
Very large. So, as a great story, I didn't have my Wall Street Journal, but in the early mornings, you're allowed to make 2 phone calls, collect. And when you pick up the phone, you can dial a number, and when the person picks up, they say, you're getting a call from the Palm Beach County Jail. Will you accept reverse charges? And the person either says yes, and the call goes through, or the person says no. The person I had called was Jimmy Kane, the president of Bear Stearns. And I said, tell me what's going on. And so that my knowledge of the financial crisis happened with Jimmy, who was at the center of the storm, telling me about what Lehman had gone under, and they were trying to figure out a way, should they bail out Bear Stearns?
Did it strike you at the time of the mess you had made of your life to be in a situation that you're one of the greatest financial minds in the world, looked at by world leaders and asked their, your thinking by the most prominent and important people in the world, and here you are in solitary confinement. You got to make a collect call to somebody. Did it strike you at the time how all the threads of your life had come together and put you in a position, or you had put yourself in that position?
No.
So it never struck you when you had to make one of your 50% of your collect calls that day, you call the president or the head of the CEO of Bear Stearns, the biggest financial event in your life is taking place, of which one, every important person in the world would be seeking your opinion. Number two would be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to apply your craft. Number three, it would be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make money if you were smart, and obviously you're smart. You're telling me here, truthfully, that it never hit you at all of how you had ended up in a place where you had to make a collect phone call from a jail cell that was 6x9 with a steel bed and your food being passed in through a slot.
The question you want to ask is, who was the other call to?
Okay. Who was the other call to?
The other call was to my friend at J.P. Morgan, who was then, I didn't know it at the time, trying to buy Bear Stearns. So at one point, I had two phones. It was difficult because they're afraid people are going to hang themselves with the phone cord. So they don't actually come together and they're pretty short. So I was actually going between two phones talking to Bear Stearns and J.P. Morgan at the same time.
So it's fascinating. I don't buy some of his naivety there. And I am just as struck as Steve Bannon is by the fact that, boy, they're taking his call. They're taking the sex offender's call from solitary confinement in the middle of a financial crisis. Really? Really? Jimmy Kane, he's taking time for him. Jess Staley's taking time for him.
Yeah. I don't know how much, maybe he was in typical solitary confinement, but as far as I understand, he was given full access to a room in the jail that was for attorneys that had.
Oh, that was later. There was a smidgen of time where he's actually in real prison.
Just during the crash, he was in.
Just during the crash. By coincidence.
That's ironic.
No, I think he probably timed it that way. I think he did his plea bargain. He thought, I'll go to prison because I've already set all the dots in motion here. Yeah. I can just go, and it's the greatest excuse in the world to be in jail. You kind of been involved.
There's a full email thread to many different people during the crash. So he was talking to a lot of people through the dates of the crash, and you can see his response. Very monotone, very, what's going on, guys? He's talking to everybody throughout the whole thing. So these were not his only interactions. He had full email capabilities throughout that moment in time.
Now, all of this brings me back to Lutnik and this thought, and then we'll end it here. Howard Lutnik must know a lot about Donald Trump. Yeah. He must have a lot of information about what Donald Trump may have been involved in or not have been involved in. And if there's a reason the Commerce Secretary maybe still has his job, maybe the fact that he is kind of expendable and he's also very important in terms of protecting all this knowledge about what Donald Trump's crimes would have been. Now, Lutnik has been supposedly invited, I don't know if he's been subpoenaed yet, to appear before the Oversight Committee. If anything, this report today should double the urgency of that. We absolutely need to hear from Lutnik, and we need to hear what he did with Epstein, and we need to hear about what he did with Donald Trump to get to the bottom of this extraordinary scheme that they were involved in.
I will be curious to see how his story has changed now that we have more information. Because not only, he's a very typical player. He was very wealthy. He bought a house from Leslie Wexner. He then worked in the White House. He went into politics. He was on the island. He was sending his nannies over to Epstein's house for interviews, whatever that means. He became the very typical person in Epstein's circle But he also had a lot more power than most of them did eventually. So I will be. I don't think I'll believe a word he says, but I will be curious about how his story will change.
Also connected, by the way, to the cryptocurrency world. This is a very compromised player, to say the least. And it's interesting, and I'll leave it here because I've said leave it here a few times, but it's interesting that the previous Trump Commerce Secretary, whose name escapes me right now, but I'll come to me in a second, was also connected to the Bank of Cyprus, and another criminal mind who was very heavily involved in money laundering. And the reason I say that is because that same person, whose name will come to me, was also involved in bailing out Donald Trump in the 90s. When Donald Trump needed to be bailed out, this is the person that did it. I can't believe I can't remember his name because it's...
Is it Wilbur Ross?
Yeah, Wilbur Ross. Sorry, thank you. Oh,
okay.
Sometimes I get blind spots. Wilbur Ross not only bailed out Donald Trump in the 90s when his casinos went tits up, he also lands up being the head of Rothschild's Inc. At that time. That's how the bailout happened. Rothschild's Inc. tied to the Rothschilds, support Epstein, and then he goes off to be the head of the Bank of Cyprus, this money laundering bank in Cyprus that is connected to the Russian mob, to Vekselberg, to Deripaska, to the whole lot of them. And of course, that features in the story with Lutnik, which I just published on The Greatest Heist on narrative.org. People should check it out. It's probably the most comprehensive research we've done on Lutnik, and there'll be another chapter coming up too with a lot more information about how he's connected to the Russians. And Ellie Leonard, tell us what's going on at the Panicked Writer, because there's so much all the time. You really are digging into Jane Doe number 4. That's a huge investigation you're involved in.
I'm trying to verify something surrounding something called the Renaissance Weekend that occurred in Hilton Head Island, which was all these people that we're talking about. It was benefactors and philanthropists and academics and people in journalism. They all met on the island. They all started in the New Year's of 1980-81, right around when this story happened. And so we're just trying to dig into some of the very, very basic details of this story, just to verify a victim's testimony. That's all I'm here to do. And so that's what I'm working on.
This is why Ellie Leonard is the real deal. She actually does all the work that other journalists just don't want to do, because it's such dogged work and it's so important. But you go back to the sources, you go absolutely for days, hours, weeks on a story, trying to really trace the origin of a story and see if it's correct. It's incredible work that you do. It really, I like doing that stuff too, but boy, most people are sort of
like nitty gritty. I like it too.
You need time, you need patience, because it's a lot of digging and you do it incredibly.
But I think it's that puzzle mentality of like you're solving something, like you're putting little pieces together until you can sit back and look at it and be like, aha, I think I know what this looks like, or it looks like nothing. I've proved that it doesn't exist, one way or another, so that if I go out and report on something, I have an accurate sort of point of view to speak on it. Yeah,
no, I hear you, and that feeling when the puzzle piece fits in is great. There's nothing like it when you're like, ha, gotcha. That's Ellie Leonard from The Panicked Writer. Everyone should subscribe if you haven't yet, although I'm sure you all have. Incredible work on Epstein and all the other stories you do. Thanks for being here tonight, and thank you at home for being here on this sort of quickly organized special report. Please check out The Greatest Heist.
Narrative.org.
Go to narrative.org. I'm terrible at this part.
You got to talk about yourself. You have a new chapter of The Greatest Heist from book 2, all about Howard Lutnik, and it's published right now, right?
It is, and I should talk about myself in a more concerted effort to make sure that people check it out. Yeah. But it's The Greatest Heist is the book. It's a book about Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein and how they committed the greatest heist, the greatest crime in history. And we've detailed it over 2 books now. This is the second book. It's all about the 2008 crash. And it ties Russia into all these crimes that happened and are still happening in the White House and elsewhere today. Check it out. Okay. Thanks for being here, everybody. Have a great night.
Yeah.
Cheers, Ellie.
See you guys later. Bye.
Bye.